My name's Nicholas Carlisle, and I am so honored to be part of your 푸코포럼 in Korea today. And I'm so impressed by your work at the Blue Tree Foundation and your commitment to eradicating cyberbullying and cyber violence around the world. And the only way we're going to be able to do that and create a better internet for everyone is if we come together and join forces like this. And I'm so honored to be part of your coalition of experts that you're bringing together to make childhood bully-free in Korea. So today, I'm going to talk about how we can prevent cyberbullying before it begins by ensuring that every young child has the life skills that they need for an increasingly online world. But I thought before we begin, I should tell you a little bit about my story and how come I care so much about bullying and cyberbullying. It all begins at this school that you can see in this picture. When I was 12 years old, I was sent to this school in London, and I was the youngest boy in the school, and my parents weren't that well off compared with the other families in the school. And I was relentlessly bullied for the next 4 years. The other students called me the runt, which in English means the smallest one. And they would take my possessions and things and throw them around the schoolyard. And there was a group of boys that would regularly wait for me in between lessons and punch me in the stomach. And they would punch me so hard that I couldn't breathe and I would fall to the ground. And this continued for 3 or 4 years that I was at that school. But I think the worst part was never hearing a kind word, never having a friendly hand on my shoulder, having no friends. Because often the effect of bullying is to deny people friendship. And I managed to survive those 4 years by focusing on work and studying, and I did well in my studies. But that 4 years really left an impact on me. And I think when you are bullied, you can go in 2 different routes. You can start to believe what the other people are saying about you, so you feel bad about yourself. And at the same time, you start to feel bad about the world. You start to believe that the world is a hostile place, that people are inherently cruel and uncaring. Or you can hang on to a greater sense of humanity and recognize that not everyone is like that, that there is a better side to people, and most people actually are caring if you can tap into that side of them. And I think because I had parents who were loving and kind, they encouraged me to remember that side. And when I left school, I was committed to fighting for the underdog and for a juster, fairer, kinder world. But I always remember that experience, and I put myself through grad school and started to study as part of my grad school thesis, my dissertation, what are the effects of bullying? And as I looked at that, I realized first off that the numbers being bullied are huge. So UNICEF and UNESCO tell us that roughly 1/3 of children around the world are the target of bullying. And many of those youth are also the target of cyberbullying. There's a big overlap in terms of who's being bullied face-to-face in the daytime and who's being bullied online 24/7. And I also realized as I looked at bullying that it's a fundamental denial of essential needs. And what you see on the screen here is a very classic statement of needs, which was created by Abraham Maslow, who was one of the great psychologists of the last century in the United States. And if you look at this pyramid, what he's saying here is that we need to get our fundamental needs met. For physiological needs means just for food and substance and safety. But if you look at bullying, bullying starts to attack our sense of safety. But also you can see the third up from the bottom on this pyramid is belonging. What Abraham Maslow said is that we all need to belong. We all need to feel part of a family, but we also need to feel part of our peer group, because that's the first way that we experience being part of society. And the problem with bullying is it gets in the way of safety, but it also gets in the way of that fundamental need to belong. And I think no one says the effects of bullying more powerfully than William James. And you'll see here a photograph of William James, who's considered to be the father of psychology in the United States. And what James says is that if no one turned around when we entered a room, or answered when we spoke, or minded what we did, but if every person that we met cut us out as if we were dead and acted as if we were non-existent things, a kind of rage would well up inside of us, from which body torture would be a relief. So he uses the word torture here in the context of being socially excluded, which is one of the major forms of bullying. And he was speaking a long time ago, before they could actually study what actually is happening inside people. But of course, now we have fMRI devices and we can start to scan what's happening inside of people. And this slide here, which is a picture of the brain, starts to show what happens when someone is bullied. And when someone is bullied, our whole nervous system reacts as if we were under physical attack. There's some fascinating studies done by Naomi Eisenberger and University of California in the United States. And what she has shown is that when people are socially excluded, the same part of their brain lights up as if they were under physical attack. Just think about that for a moment. So in other words, our nervous system is reacting to social exclusion, which is a form of bullying, in the same way as if we were physically in danger. And that's because we are wired to belong. That's what Abraham Maslow was saying. We are wired to belong. We need to belong. If we don't belong, our whole nervous system considers that a threat. And what we see under bullying is that people go into 5 major responses if they're the subject of prolonged bullying, and that includes cyberbullying. So sometimes they will go into a fight response, and you'll see that where a student gets so angry that they attack the people who are bullying, physically attack them. And sometimes students who are being bullied just want to run away. And I remember one of the schools I was working with, the police were called in because a man was chasing a child through the streets of the town, and they stopped them. They said, "What's going on?" And it was the principal of the school trying to bring back one of his students. And every day in the break, that young student would run from the school because he couldn't take the bullying anymore. And sometimes students go into a freeze response, which is a numb type of response, which is very similar to depression. So if you look around any school, you'll see some students that are checked out, whose eyes are glazed over. And if you investigate a little bit, those students are often going through a form of trauma. And that trauma often can be bullying. Some students go into more of a submission response. And those are the students that seemingly just give in. And when they're bullied, they laugh along with it and they give up and they don't try and fight back at all. And some students go into a more of an attachment response where they're very clinging. And you'll see those students hanging around, maybe in the library, hanging around one of the teachers because they feel so insecure and threatened by their peers. So as I studied bullying and its effects, I was horrified to see that it is a form of trauma. And over time, trauma leads post-traumatic symptoms on people. And that's why you see the terrible effects of bullying that we do see, where students are depressed, they're anxious, they cannot sleep, they start to have ideas of doing violence to other children. And sadly, in extreme cases, they take their own lives because they see that as the only way to make their situation better. And as we study the rise of cyberbullying, we see some really disturbing statistics. Microsoft in the last year did a study of what's happening in this period of lockdown when so many of us cannot go out and when so many schools have moved to online. And Microsoft's Digital Civility Index, which they publish, found that in the last year in the countries that they studied, digital civility, people's ability to be kind and respectful to each other, had significantly declined under lockdown. Here in the United Kingdom, where I'm talking to you from today, Ditch the Label does an annual bullying survey, and they found in the last year that 27% of youth, so that's children aged 12 to 18, were the target of cyberbullying. So that number is a significant increase on the surveys from the years before when they were tracking cyberbullying. And cyberbullying is also on the rise in terms of younger children. It's extending its reach to younger children. So here's a statistic in America that 21% of American tweens, that's children between the age of 9 and 12, were bullied significantly online over the last couple of years. So those are chilling statistics about the rise of bullying. And another lens that we need to understand bullying through is that it's a systemic problem. So if you look at this chart here, which I often call the bullseye chart, because it looks like a target that you would often use maybe to play darts on, for instance, or a game on. But in this case, we're mapping out bullying. And for every incident of bullying, which is the red dot in the middle of this slide, you have to look at the influences of the bystanders around it. Are they laughing? Are they encouraging it? Are they just doing nothing? And you need to look at the teachers. Are the teachers doing nothing? Are they somehow joining in and laughing when the other students tease the target of bullying? Is the administration, which is the next circle, the principal and the head teachers of the school, are they organizing the school in a way that every student feels like they belong? Because they need to be doing that. If not, you get bullying. Are the parents also competitive with each other and deciding that some students belong and some students don't belong? And what's the online culture like? So if we're going to turn around bullying, we need to look at the sort of culture of the game platforms that students are playing on. For instance, the Xbox platform. Is it a platform which is where cyberbullying and mean comments are prevalent? And the local community, what's it like out there in that village, in that town, in that city, in terms of how people show respect to each other, or the level of racism or discrimination or intolerance in that town towards certain groups? All of that will be reflected in the school environment if the local community is that way. And then we have all our societal values, which are showing up in how we as adults behave online with each other. Do we mock? Is it a cancel culture? Do we shame people online? All of that is in play. And as I looked at all of that, I realized that cyberbullying is also a systemic problem. And the only way we're really going to address that is by all of us coming together and see how we can shift, how we can create changes in these bigger systems that are causing the individual incidents of bullying that we're wanting to stop. So, a few years back, I was in Seoul in South Korea, and I was at a conference organized by UNESCO, and I and a group of us were so concerned about the rise of cyberbullying that we stood up on the stage and we put out a call to anyone who felt called to come together to address cyberbullying. And it was wonderful meeting in your beautiful capital city. And there was so much enthusiasm and motivation for doing something about it. So 25 of us from that meeting went on to a 2-day session where we looked at what are the solutions to cyberbullying. And here we are, you can see a photograph of us in London engaging in this design session. And as we looked at this space, we realized some significant things about the pattern of online use. And we realized that children are getting online from their earliest years. You can see a picture of the world on this screen here and some of the global statistics. 200,000 students, children, join the internet every day around the world. And what's significant is that the average age at which youth are going online, which in the 1970s was, in terms of screen time, was around 4 years. Now, children's first interaction with screens is at the age of 4 months, incredibly young. And by the time they're 8 in more developed countries, they're averaging 5 hours of screen time a day, and that's excluding school. And with school going online in the past year, many estimates say that the time of children online has doubled. So as we looked at all of that, we realized that if we're going to tackle children's online behavior around cyberbullying, we need to reach them while they're still young. And by young children, I mean under the age of 8. The second thing that we realized as we looked at the problem of cyberbullying was that education is our best way to prevent cyberbullying. And we realized that if we were going to really help children both not become a bully, but also protect themselves from bullying, we had to reach them before the age of 8, because it's at that time that children are most responsive to learning values and to learning life skills. And so because of that, we decided to focus on children under the age of 8 and teach them the life skills that they need for their online and their offline lives. And to help us understand what they needed, we turned to the leading researchers around the world in childhood and in technology. And we asked their help in mapping out what are the social and emotional skills that this generation needs. What you see on this slide is what we call the power wheel. And this is 12 essential skills and values that every child needs. And this slide takes traditional skills like emotional regulation, which means the ability to understand what you're feeling and to manage what you're feeling, and it extends that into the online world. So for instance, many children spend hours online, and as they spend time online, especially at certain sites, their anxiety levels increase, their stress levels increase, their kindness decreases. And we also see other phenomena that happen when children go online, which is that their disinhibition increases. In other words, they're more likely to do antisocial things online than they would face-to-face. So as we looked at the space, we realized there are some skills here that every child needs, that are different from the old skills that children needed, that are the skills that are needed for this 21st century of an increasingly online childhood. So that was the birth of the Power of Zero campaign. It's a campaign that wants to reach children around the whole world and teach them the skills and values that they need to navigate their online, offline lives. I wanted to show you this slide here around how we will do this, because I think it's interesting for you to see what we are creating. And we are creating a multi-platform program that reaches children through lessons in the preschool, in kindergarten, in the classroom, traditional lessons, but teaching these social emotional skills, these life skills. We're also creating a set of videos because we believe that animation has huge appeal to children and is incredibly engaging in terms of getting children to watch and learn. We're creating storybooks, big ones for the classroom and small ones that parents and grandparents can read to children at home. And we're looking for a partner with one of the big tech companies for an online game. This is what we are developing. We are a collaborative campaign. We're very proud to have UNESCO and UNICEF part of our campaign, along with some of the big tech companies like Microsoft and Facebook and Xbox. And we're inviting NGOs around the world to join us and be the country leads in taking this campaign to their countries. And so we very much hope that we can do this with you in Korea and bring this to the children of Korea. We believe that education changes culture, and that through a change of culture, we can solve cyberbullying. And we very much hope that we can join with you in doing this campaign. I want to close by thanking you all for inviting me here today to be part of this really important conference. And I want to say that together we can end cyber violence for the children of Korea. Thank you very much. Yes, so in the United States and the United Kingdom, where Power Zero works, there's no law that says it's illegal to cyberbully, but instead there are very strong laws about harassment. So if a student is targeted because of what's known as protected characteristic, so they're targeted because of their race or their gender or the fact that they're disabled, then that's known as harassment. And if schools fail to prevent the bullying that's going on, then the families often will bring a law case against the school to say you failed to protect my child from harassment. And that's the biggest pressure on schools to do something about cyberbullying and bullying. Yes, so if you look at bullying and cyberbullying, there are many forms of that which are not going to be covered by the law. And so we cannot turn to the law for solutions, which is why nonprofits like Power Zero exist, because we believe that if the law is not going to be the solution, we have to go into schools and use the power of education to help prevent cyberbullying. Well, let me talk about the United States, which is where our program is biggest. And so in the States, many of the states in the United States have put in place regulations, which aren't really law, but they're almost like best practice. And in those regulations, they absolutely encourage schools to go through that system of having very clear reporting mechanisms. And then they say the schools have to respond effectively, and they have to let parents know what they've done. And then there's an appeal process where, in most states, where if a family is not happy with how the school has attempted to resolve it, then they can file an appeal, a complaint, and the school has to then do more to solve the situation. So it seems a little bit similar, but it doesn't have this full status of law. It's more recommended in the United States. So as far as I'm aware, it's not required in any of the states in the US or in the United Kingdom, but some schools see that it's helpful, but I think the teaching around it is sketchy, is very irregular. And I think in our countries, the major form of teaching for students in this area is around something called social and emotional learning, which is not so narrow as cyber violence, but there is a realization that students need that broad set of life skills that I talked about earlier around how to manage their inner life, which is emotional intelligence, and how to manage their relationships, which is social intelligence. And in that broad field, there's a lot of encouragement right now in the United States that schools do implement social and emotional learning programs. And as part of that, they often talk about bullying and about cyber bullying, but it's only part of this broader curriculum around social and emotional skills. So at Power Zero, we run the No Bully program. And the No Bully program is aimed to support schools in preventing bullying and responding effectively when it happens. And what we've discovered is that punishment doesn't help eradicate bullying. What we found is if we go in hard and we try and punish the students who are bullying, it leads to retaliation against the kid being bullied. And it doesn't teach the students who are bullying pro-social skills. So then we've started to look at, well, what does help? And what we've created, which I'm really proud of, is something called Solution Team. And what happens under a solution team is that if a student's being bullied, the school brings together 3 or 4 of the bullying students, along with 3 or 4 of the students that the others look up to, what here we call the pro-social students. So you have a group of about 8 students, and the target's not there because it's too stressful for them. So you say to these 8 students, someone's name, like Jan is really suffering, and the worst night of the week for him is Sunday night because he dreads going back to school. And when he goes to school, people make these comments about his mother and his family, which are very derogatory comments, painful comments. And no one ever sits with him in the recess period. No one ever talks to him. And Jan is in this incredibly lonely space where he doesn't enjoy school. And some days he wonders, what's the point of being alive? So you walk that group of 8 students into the shoes of Jan, and we find that in 90% of cases, those students not only want to do something about it, but they do something about it. And we meet with them again 1 week later. And in 90% of cases, the bullying has stopped. There's one follow-up meeting after that to reinforce this change. And our research is showing that if we use a solution team of students like that, we solve the bullying, and 3 months later, the bullying is still finished. So we're very proud to have a solution that's non-punitive, that's based around activating students' empathy to end the bullying. We find that's the most powerful solution. So quite a few of our partners in Power Zero are the big tech companies, and they are beginning to use AI to track when there's cyberbullying on their platforms. So for instance, Instagram and TikTok are both starting to use devices to track for hate speech and for hostile words on their devices. And both those applications have experimented with nudges, which is when a person is sending or is about to send a message that it contains hate speech or cyberbullying. They get a nudge, do you really want to send this? So there's an attempt already to try and automate interventions to prevent cyberbullying. But one of the problems here is that it doesn't pick up everything. I see. Yes. So most of the big tech platforms, online platforms, have a process where you can report cyberbullying. And they also, the big tech companies, have their internal community standards, and they all in their community standards say that cyberbullying will not be tolerated on their platforms. I think it's wonderful in Korea that you have such strong student councils carrying out these campaigns. And I think student councils in the United States and the United Kingdom are less strong than yours in Korea. And oftentimes we'll hear of a lone individual student saying we must create a campaign about bullying or cyberbullying. But that's rare. And it's generally the schools themselves, the teachers and the school administrators that will launch a bullying prevention initiative. It's not the students. It's unusual for the students to be starting it. But I think it's a great model that you have in Korea, and I think it could be inspiring to people in other countries. So I think most of the anti-bullying programs in the West now see the importance of the bystander, and they talk about the bystander. So if a school is running an anti-bullying program, they're very likely to be talking to students about the importance of not just being a bystander, but actually standing up for the students who are being bullied. So I think that concept is quite widespread here in the West. I love the importance that you place on early detection. And I think the best way to deal with cyberbullying and bullying is to look at it in the general way that you're looking for students who are at risk of anything. And the best way to do that is to train every teacher to be the eyes of the school, to use their eyes, and to look for the students who are alone at recess, to look for the students who seem to have ripped clothes or bruises on their faces, to look for the students that have downcast looks on their faces, that seem unhappy. Those are the early signs. And if we watch for those, we can then go and talk to those students and find out what's causing it. And maybe it's bullying, but it might be something else. It could be something painful happening in their home lives. But in some ways, it doesn't matter what the cause is. We should be watching out for students who are unhappy and talking to them and finding out what it is and doing our best to solve it. What we see in the West is that bullying is a very embarrassing and painful subject for youth to talk about. And most students are reluctant to admit that they're being bullied and to seek help. And so it takes some skill to be able to talk to them and to help them say what's really going on. Because most students want to say face, and it's an admission of weakness to say I'm being bullied. So it's hard for students to talk about it. And when students do talk about it, it differs country by country how much they are willing to talk to a counselor about it. In most countries that I know here in the West, there's not a strong culture of people seeing therapists or talking to the school counselor. So that's also, it's hard to persuade people to do that. I think it's a little bit more easy when someone's being bullied and they're really suffering, because they often realize that they need some help. But it's very difficult to get the bullying students to see a school counselor and to admit that they have a problem. I think it's a really important question to look at what happens after you do an intervention to stop bullying. And I love that you are thinking about the best way to help that student find their place and find belonging in their peer group, because that really is the solution to bullying, that they feel like they belong and they can join in and be part of their school community. The reality, what we find is that some of those students have never enjoyed that they've often and long time felt on the outside. And so it's not as simply a question of them going back in time, because if you go back in time, what was back in time is not so good either. So they often need to learn new ways of relating to their peers, and they need help around dropping the worldview that everyone's against them. So I think one of the most important interventions around bullying is to change the environment around any student who's being bullied. And that's why we run solution teams in schools, because our solution team intervention is designed to not just work with the bully and the victim of bullying, what we call the target, but to work with the wider peer group, because you need to do something like that so that when the bullying's over, they come into an environment that's different. You have to work with the wider group of students to do that. So most countries in the West now are tracking cyberbullying, but there's no agreed upon definition of what they mean by cyberbullying. So it's very hard to compare across countries. And for that reason, no, there's no one unified resource or website that lists all the cyberbullying country by country in one table. So the best we can get at is individual countries' assessments of cyberbullying. And you need to then look at the definition they're using for cyberbullying. So for instance, I talked about the United Kingdom and Ditch the Labels survey of cyberbullying from last year, which found that 27% of children were engaged in cyberbullying. Well, that's a wonderful question, the difference between cyberbullying in the East and the West. And I don't know, I haven't studied it enough. I've worked a little bit in Hong Kong, and what I noticed there is that in Hong Kong, there's a strong emphasis on saving face, very strong. And because of that, it meant that people were very unwilling to talk about bullying and to admit that even if they did talk about it, to admit that it was actually affecting them. And that's the biggest difference that I've seen around bullying. I don't know if that also extends to cyberbullying. So the Para Zero campaign is focused on young children. And we believe that we need to teach the next generation a healthy relationship with their screens. That's the foundation of well-being for their online, offline lives. And in the early years, when they're still babies, their screen interactions are governed by their parents. And as we build out our program, we want to help parents really think through how do they create a healthy relationship for their children with screens, with a special focus on the first moments when they show their child a device. They need to give a lot of thought to when they do it, what age they do it. We follow the World Health Organization, the WHO guidelines, which recommend no screen time to children under the age of 2. And we recommend that too as well. And then after the age of 2, I think we need to give a lot of thought about how much screen time to give our young children and what is a healthy relationship with a screen. In other words, a lot of thought to the sorts of apps and games and entertainment that you might show a young child on a screen. Yes, because if you think Para Zero works with the parents for the first few years of life, because there's no way we're going to be able to reach directly to those babies and without the help of parents. So we want to help parents be very thoughtful in how they expose children to screens. So the solution team intervention is a really extraordinarily powerful intervention. And I would love to work with you to bring it to the youth of Korea, because I think it could be so powerful for them. Under solution team, you bring together a group of students to solve the bullying. And we've done that from as early as the age of 5. So in kindergarten, we've used the solution team intervention to work. You have to adjust it a little bit for the age of the children. So at that age, you're often, as the kindergarten teacher, using your relationship with the children. So as a teacher, you go in and you say, my feelings have been hurt. You've been leaving this other child out, and I feel hurt when I see Johnny or whoever the student is looking so sad and so lonely. I feel hurt. And the students have a very strong relationship generally with their kindergarten teacher, and they want to make it better. So that's how you would do it for the younger ages. But solution team works from ages 5 all the way into what we call high school, all the way into 16, 17, 18-year-olds.